So on October 9th, last year, so in 2024, New York Times have came out with an article or a sort of, I think they called it a guest essay by Feroz Sidwa, uh, who basically he did sort of a few short paragraphs at the start, and then it was a bunch of testimonies from the healthcare workers in Gaza, sort of talking about what they've seen, talking about dead children they've seen coming into hospitals, talking about the malnourishment, talking about basically few of the things that they have seen. And I think when this originally came out, I've seen some of those things, but I didn't think there was a sort of enough information to really talk about it because it's pretty much a bunch of opinions from people who were there. It's hard to really comment on it, but the Times of Israel have came out with I think a pretty decent article, sort of putting it into a bigger perspective. So today we can go through both of these. I'll read a little bit from the original article and I'll also bring up some of the testimonies, and then we'll go through the Times of Israel article. Welcome to the reality show. Joining me today are Marco and Richard. And Marco, just before we go to the article, what do you make of the article in general and sort of New York Times deciding to publish this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it still staggers me how much people are ignoring the facts and how much they're trying to um, cover together some facts that allegedly makes it look like Israel is the bad guy here. Um, Ultimately, we're shown lots of images, lots of so-called testimonies from people we don't know about and we don't really care either, because all they're saying that they witness wounds. And even if this were true, even if they were reliable people, the point is that presenting this kind of fact is just a way of distracting you from the real point. And the point is, if you don't want your children in Gaza to be killed, do not start a war. And certainly do not go and kill children in Israel itself. Let's all remind the Bibas kids, they were kids, they weren't shot in the head, but they were killed probably worse, in a worse way, by being taken away from the mother, taken away from the home. So let's not forget that all this kind of obfuscation is just designed to make it look like the Palestinians are the victims here. They are not. The Palestinians are the parasitic savages which have been trying to destroy Israel for the last 80 years. And every time they're trying to play the victims here, uh, don't forget that they started a war. They do not want to surrender. They still have their hostages, the few alive that they are there. So, you know, Crimea River.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this particular original article passed me by, but then there is so much anti-Israel propaganda. It's not surprising, despite having your ear to the ground as much as we do across this period since October the 7th. I think what this relates to is a poll of 65, which is a pretty small number, healthcare workers within Israel. And of course, these are, somebody who is a healthcare worker in Israel, whether they're a foreigner who chooses to go and be a healthcare worker post October the 7th, or whether they are actually there originally, they're a self-selecting group. And we talk about, who what their makeup is and is likely to be, and the extent to which we can tell what it is for a start in the course of this episode, I'm sure. But I think the key point that I get out of this is, apart from this disconnected set of context dropped pieces of testimony, is the fact that you're having people who are being told they got an injury coming into the hospital or where they work. They're being given secondhand knowledge as to what caused that particular injury. Then the New York Times is presenting that as third-hand knowledge. In both cases, both the health worker and the New York Times seem to be demonstrating first-hand bias when it comes to interpreting that knowledge. And of course, it's then read in the Western world by readers who have fourth-hand knowledge, but the same first-hand bias. that first-hand bias being either an anti-Israel bias or an out-and-out anti-Semitism, from top to bottom. And I think it's the way that this is done, which is designed to make you look at individual things where you're not allowed to see the full details, not given the full picture. You're not even, you're just told to look at this and feel bad, which is no different from any of the gazillion pictures of sometimes carefully staged, sometimes manipulated, sometimes genuine in the sense that the Palestinians and their kids are within the rubble of a war, but it is a war. And it is a war that they started, which is the point Marco made there, which we could say at every single juncture of this entire episode, because it can't be said too often.
Now, someone in the chat is asking, do they differentiate those directly perished by IDF versus locals, like Hamas couldn't kill their own for a number of reasons? So when Hamas publishes their numbers, or the Gaza Health Ministry publishes its numbers, those are supposedly the consequences of Israel. Now, even when we go through this article, there is at least one example where Hamas has claimed that someone was killed by Israel, and later we learned they were killed by Hamas. You could also remember the bombing of the Al Ali hospital, when as soon as it happened, Hamas has said this was Israel, and many of the Western media have repeated that. And then it turned out it was an Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Jihad, yeah, Islamic Jihad. Yeah, I have my terrorist groups confused. Now, when it comes to sort of even talking about this, something that should always be remembered, and something that this article, I think, sort of very well is sort of fighting against, something that should be remembered is that every death is on Hamas. Even when we go through some of the, I'm not sure if we'll go through any of the really, like, if true, really sad testimonials about what happened. The fact is, especially since it portrays children, innocent children, especially very young. The fact is that all of this is on Hamas. Hamas has decided on October 7th to invade Israel, and it should be Israel's responsibility, and the world should recognize that it is on Israel to finish this war as soon as possible, so the deaths are minimized. But by sort of keeping this on, I think at the end of the day, the deaths are going to be much higher at the end of the, especially if this issue doesn't get solved, and Hamas and the Palestinians who do want more October 7th persevere and continue sort of acting like this, and we'll see more of this unless something happens. I should also mention, because I'm not sure if I mentioned, the title of this is 65 Doctors, Nurses, and Paramedics, What We Saw in Gaza. This was originally published at the New York Times on October 9th. And as I said, it's a guest essay by Feroz Sidva. I'll put that in the description. Now, yeah, let's go to the article itself. I was just watching if I should do anything before. So let's read first few paragraphs from the article itself, then I want to comment on, and then we can go to the testimonials. So it starts. Nearly every day I was there, I saw a new young child who had been shot in the head or the chest, virtually all of whom went on to die, 13 in total. I worked as a trauma surgeon in Gaza from March 28th to 25th to April 8th. I volunteered in Ukraine and Haiti, and I grew up in Flint, Michigan. I've seen violence and worked in conflict zones, but of the many things that stood out about working in a hospital in Gaza, one got to me. Nearly every day I was there, I saw a new young child who had been shot in the head or the chest, virtually all of whom went on to die, 13 in total. At the time, I assumed this has been the work of a particularly sadistic soldier located nearby, but after returning home, I met an emergency medicine physician who had worked in a different hospital in Gaza 2 months before me. now quote, "I couldn't believe the number of kids I saw shot in the head. I told him. To my surprise, he responded, 'Yeah, me too, every single day.'" Now, already I think it starts with immediate bias, immediate sort of saying sadistic soldier. Now, unless it's implying it's a sadistic Hamas soldier, the implication is that this is on Israel. Now, again, these people are not someone who are on the field. They are someone who do simply get the injured people and then try to save them. Now, by what assumption are you saying this is Israel? And also, why would the assumption be sort of that they are some sort of sadistic soldier? We know Hamas is using children to fight for them. If you have a if you have a child that picks up AK and points it at you, if you have a child running at you, not to mention Hamas uses children as suicide bombers. If you have someone sort of running at you as a suicide bomber, I mean, are you supposed to like let them take you out? It's an unfortunate fact of the war, but the blame is on Hamas putting children in those positions. Now, of course, we don't know either if this was the case, but what is the case is the blame is always on Hamas, and you cannot make any positive sort of claims about that Israel was the one doing it. But yeah, Marco, what do you make of the first few paragraphs?
Yeah, first of all, bear in mind this war was caused by the Palestinians invading Israel, butchering over 1,000 people, and taking 250 hostages back to Gaza. So let's bear that in mind. That a point that never will change. So the retaliation that occurs, as you mentioned, is because of the action of the Palestinians. So the consequence of the action or the violence, mindless butchery committed on October the 7th, 23, resulted in some civilian victims. It's terrible. You know, nobody cheers when a child dies, unless you're a psychopath or unless you're a Palestinian. Because let's bear in mind that the different attitude in the West, if a child is hurt, compared to the attitude of the Gazans or the Palestinians generally, when a child dies, they lap it up. They're happy about it because this child dies for the cause, and it's a child that, although perhaps didn't hold the weapon against the Israelis, can be used as a propaganda tool against Israel. So they showed a number of times that they don't care about their own children. First of all, by causing October the 7th, by not wanting to surrender to Israel, and of course by arming them, by fighting in civilian clothing, by just saying there's a child with a bullet coming from an Israeli or a NATO weapon, only means that the bullet went into the kid's head. It doesn't say who shot it. It doesn't say whether it came from an IDF soldier. It doesn't say that perhaps the weapon was stolen by a Palestinian fighter, a terrorist. They do that. They steal from the bodies of the soldiers they kill, and often they shoot in the air. How are you not to know that that wasn't the case? A bullet coming from one of these things. So to assume the cause, the origin of the injury, is the least scientific thing that a doctor could do. That's pure speculation. That's pure propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, the extent to which the testimonies are valid are the extent to which you've got the backing up of forensic evidence, and you've got the statements about the injury themselves and whether you can verify those statements about the injury. To assume the circumstances is to take a second leap away from the facts that you've got at that moment, and that's regardless of who family members of the injured person are telling you is the case, because in many cases they are the same fighters that you're talking about. I mean, we'll probably get to it, but later in the piece, there's a reference to the fact that a father and brother describe the circumstances of why the child was injured by a sniper. Well, the father and brother could well be Hamas fighters anyway. I mean, we're often being told that there's this distinction between men and women, which is already somewhat erroneous when it comes to their culpability in terms of what's going on in Gaza. But even if you take that as true, what you're being told by the men in this situation is often used as a tool of where the suffering and the death of kids is used as an active and intentional tool of war by the Palestinians. I mean, I note you're talking about it, the fact the article doesn't say what kind of soldier could be being sadistic. But remember, of course, that the New York Times and the Guardian, the BBC, and all those, they never refer to Hamas as soldiers. They refer to them as fighters if they refer to them in that way at all. And so the word soldiers is encased in insinuation. It's marinated in insinuation that it's an Israeli soldier. And of course, this whole nature of this article is marinated in insinuation. And you are expected to bring your first-hand bias to this article to fill in all the gaps that are prompted for you by this in the context of all the other kinds of articles that surround it in these publications, in order to accuse Israel yourself and not allow, not make it the New York Times' fault that you've come to that conclusion, even if they've been the ones that have led the crumbs and deliberately pointed you in one particular direction, despite the absence of evidence to say that is remotely the case.
Yeah, and something that is important to point out, something that is brought up a bit later, is IDF was reached out to comment on this, and they sort of gave a general statement of, I can bring it up. The IDF is committed to mitigating civilian harm during operational activity, and then continuing. Why are they not asking Hamas to comment on this? What is, like, it's clearly insinuating something. I mean, I was in the UK when the Queen died. If I asked Richard, do you have a comment on the Queen dying, or maybe what has happened? I mean, I'm clearly trying to insinuate something, right? So again, why is Hamas not asking to comment on this? Why is there not a single person assuming that it might be Hamas actually doing this? No, it's on Israel because, if you believe Israel's are diabolical Jews, then of course they would shoot children for fun, as with one of the sort of testimonials almost insinuating that. But let's continue with the article. Now, they post sort of three pictures, and people might have seen them in the past. There are sort of X-ray scans with bullets. Basically, they look like children, and they have bullets inside. One has like in the middle of a skull. One has sort of, and two more are sort of more close to somewhere like this around the neck. And continuing with the article, these photographs of X-rays were provided by Dr. Mimi Siyet, who worked in Khan Yunis from August 8th to September 5th. She said, I had multiple pediatric patients, mostly under the age of 12, who were shot in the head or the left side of the chest. Usually they were single shots. The patients came in neither dead or critical and died shortly after arriving, Dr. Mimi Siyet. An enormous amount of information about the extent of the devastation in Gaza has been gleaned from satellite data, humanitarian organization, and Gaza's Ministry of Health. However, Israel does not allow journalists or human rights investigators into Gaza outside of a very small number of embedded reporting trips with the Israeli military, and stories from Palestinian journalists in Gaza have not been read widely enough, despite the incredible risks they take in reporting there. So again, you have the same sort of thing. Israel is not allowing journalists in. Now, Hamas is not allowing journalists either. They allow certain kinds of journalists to go in. And even then, when Hamas allows journalists to go in, the assumption is they are going to show a certain side of the story, or they will not be let in again. So again, the sort of similar thing is like, what do you have to hide, Israel? Why are you not letting journalists to go in? I mean, Marco, what do you make of this part?
I mean, this part is particularly pathetic. It's the doctor says, "Oh, I have patients and the devastation in Gaza can be seen by satellite images and by the testimony of the Minister of Health in Gaza, which, by the way, is Hamas. Yeah. I mean, what does it even mean? It's a massive non sequitur. But again, the fact that she had patient, she or he, whatever it is, the, yeah, she had patients with, pediatric patients, i.e., children, mostly below age of 16 or 12, whatever they were. Well, it doesn't say anything about those above 12. Were they were they terrorists that got shot during some kind of activity? And of course, this doesn't even cover the fact that during, in a war situation, you might well have a rogue soldier that does something stupid. No, nobody can deny that. But that doesn't damn the whole of Israel. If somebody does something stupid, that person will be picked up and punished if that's the case. And also, of course, there are accidents where a child might well be shot by an IDF soldier during an operation because they were moving about. When you have Palestinians shooting at you from every angle, uh, you might make a mistake and hit a kid instead. So nobody's denying that these children might have been hit by Israeli bullets, but they didn't choose to do that. Let's not forget also that um, some doctors, lots of the hostages were actually were held by doctors or nurses. So the fact that these people were working in a hospital setting doesn't mean that they're holy people, that they're not biased or they don't hate Israel as much as the Palestinians they're looking after. So this litany, this list of injuries and people and doctors talking means absolutely nothing apart from during a war situation, some people were hit by bullets.
And the bit at the end there that you read, Daniel, was about if only the censorship of Israel didn't exist and it allowed journalists from across the world to freely go in and spend time with Hamas, they could report more directly the Hamas line. And of course, this line in there that you mentioned that said that Palestinian journalists take incredible risks, or was that effect? Yeah, incredible risks. Risks of being found out as being also Hamas members who share their press jackets with other Hamas members as they pass it from one to another, or risk of being found out that they've got a hostage in their spare bedroom, as was in the case with some of the hostages that were rescued from Gaza. So it's. And of course, you've got the fact that this is a war. You've got the fact that kids are kept in the heart of a war as a form of human shield, as a form of a means of using the humanity of the West, the humanity of Israel against itself in terms of preventing. Sometimes preventing the IDF from being able to attack a given area because they see a bunch of kids through a site and holding off an attack. So it doesn't account for all of the occasions when that occurs as well. All of the ways in which, sadly, in many ways, this Hamas technique works in allowing terrorists to survive for longer because kids are put in the way as a form of defending those terrorists from attack by the IDF. And so the outcome is a result of that.
Now, so some people in the chat are talking about the fake X-rays. So when I first saw the X-rays, they did look funny, but I have no idea how X-rays would look if they were shot. And I especially that's why I didn't want to cover it at when it came out, because I wanted to see if some expert comes in and says these are fake. And I haven't seen any sort of like really big outrage. Even in the article by Times of Israel, the X-rays were sort of taken as they are, and they weren't sort of a challenge. Now, I would imagine that if they were indeed fake, as if an expert could look at it and say, no, these are clearly fake, or you would see something different. I would believe that by this we would see something. So as of right now, I take the X-rays as they are, and I'm not gonna sort of insinuate they are fake. They might be, but I have nothing proving. Again, sometimes it's easy to look at something. Well, I don't think this would look like if it was a bullet, but I have no knowledge when it comes to any of this. But yeah, Marco, do you want to say anything on that?
Well,
Or
yeah, I mean, the X-ray could well be fake because an X-ray only shows the item in 2D. It's not like a CAT scan or something like that. And you could have the bullet here, take the X-ray, and it looks like it's inside. But of course, if you're an expert, you can probably see the compression of the tissue and all this kind of stuff. So, and anyway, you could do a fake, copy and paste images on top of something else. But that's not the issue. I mean, I'm sure that you can find the body of a child hit by a stray bullet in some situations. So that's a debate that's not even worth having about the validity of the X-ray, because the issue is that even if it's were true, and it doesn't matter if it's true or not, any injury, every death is on Hamas. They caused it. They don't surrender. So every single death on both sides is on the hands. So what is there to debate?
I think the Times of Israel article does mention at least the fact that sometimes some of these images are a single image, and you would need a corroborating image from a different angle to be able to confirm for definite whether the bullet is with it inside the skull or next to it. And of course, that is true, and also talks about how the injury would show around the bullet. But of course, yes, we're not experts from that point of view, and I understand your argument that therefore you can put that to one side. You're neither accepting nor denying whether these are true or not. You're just not making your case based on whether it's fakery or not. The one thing that we can say in a broader context, and this applies to the use more generally of children as a propaganda tool that Hamas use, is that is what they do. And when you integrate that with the rest of our knowledge about how Palestinians behave in terms of using their children as tools of war against Israel, and how exploitative they are of that aspect, intentionally so. And we've seen that with all sorts of things, including the recent BBC documentary with, the child of a senior Hamas leader, faking all sorts of things in order to promote the Hamas cause, but of course being shown as though they're an innocent child caught up in war, which, innocent child caught up in war is a thing that is happening in Gaza, but at the same time it's also being exploited and used to prolong that war in Gaza and make those innocent children suffer for longer, and suffer again and again in repeated wars if the Palestinians choose to maintain their endless belief in this ideology and their endless retention of hostages from Israel.
So people are talking about the scan. Someone says they took bullets and shadowed the images. I will be sort of careful about trying to debunk every single thing. It sort of reminds me of 12 Angry Men, where someone tries to fight at every single point. And, when you failed at one point, when it turns out, no, that was correct, or you were wrong on this, then it looks really bad on your side. It's important to remember that, yes, children are dying in Gaza. Yes, maybe some people are malnourished. I would be sort of really surprised if in a war context, really everybody is fine. Clearly, stuff is bad in Gaza, but it has to be remembered all of that is on Israel. Now, when we talk about specific propaganda, oh, Marco?
It's on Hamas, not Israel.
Oh, yeah, it's on Hamas. Sorry. And when there are sort of like specific points, like is there starvation or sort of spread starvation, then we can sort of think about those specific points. But it's important to not sort of try to defend every single thing, especially even like, some IDF soldier might do something wrong. Some sort of action of the government might be wrong, but the system of Israel is set up so when something like this happens, it takes care of. So children are not sort of like executed or directly killed. But Hamas does that. We know Hamas does that. And that's what's important to focus on. So that's why I don't think the X-ray thing is as important. But continuing with the article, but there is a group of independent observers who have seen this war from the ground day after day, volunteer healthcare workers. Through personal contacts in the medical community and good deal of searching online, I was able to get in touch with American healthcare workers who have served in Gaza since October 7, 2023. Many have familial or religious ties to the Middle East. Others, like me, do not, but felt compelled to volunteer in Gaza for a variety of reasons. Using questions based on my observations and my conversations with fellow doctors and nurses, I worked with Times Opinion to poll 65 healthcare workers about what they had seen in Gaza. 57, including myself, were willing to share their experiences on the record. The other 8 participated anonymously, either because they have family in Gaza or the West Bank, or because they fear workplace retaliation. This is what we saw. Then we'll go through testimonials. But I want to sort of make a bit more overarching point, and that is the fact that as again said, that sort of some innocent people are dying in Gaza, most particularly children, as sad as it is that, or as somewhat understanding it is for people who want to sort of help prevent innocents from dying. The fact is, these people are helping preserve the system that's going on in Gaza. These people are helping the system. This is not different from someone from the West going to the Nazis and trying to help them, or going to Imperial Japan and trying to help them. No one should be allowed to go into Gaza. This should be a quick and decisive war, making sure the regime falls and making sure that the Palestinian people, because again, any system, any government cannot exist without significant support of the people. They need it. There is no system where it's like every single person is against it and somehow the sort of government stays. There needs to be help of the population of it, and therefore that needs to be taken care of. Now, by saying that needs to be taken care of, I don't mean killing every single person in Gaza. Getting rid of the regime and imposing some occupation, hopefully sort of not permanent occupation, but sort of a path towards some joining of Israel into the future. But this is what we've done in the past in Germany and in Japan. This is what needs to happen with any sort of occupation against a regime that is completely totalitarian, that is completely irrational and no longer sort of joined or sort of reasonable in any way. And as long as we help that regime to stay, we help the people to ignore the consequences of their actions, the fact that they do declare war on Israel, they go in to Gaza and kill people, and then get to go home and sort of be safe or be protected. That cannot happen. And if it does happen, we'll see sort of this constant war cycle that will never end, because nobody will ever actually feel the consequences. But yeah, Marco, anything to say before going to some of the testimonials?
Yeah, so some of the points you were making earlier on about starvation in Gaza. Well, yeah, the starvation in Gaza because Israel provides humanitarian aid. Why on earth, God knows. But most of it is actually stolen by Hamas itself. The same Hamas that diverted resources from the international community for 20 years to build tunnels rather than making a better life for their own people. And you're right. This kind of government, this kind of dictatorship need the people's support, because people do not need a state. People to live freely and happily and productively do not need a superimposed organization that makes them do that. It's the way around. A state depends on the productivity of the individuals. A bunch of free individuals get together and give themselves a way to manage certain things by cooperation. It's not that the state comes along and say, okay, you people can now live because I exist. It's exactly the way around. But this view of statism, where the state is the agent that enables your life, is totally, totally upside down. But anyway, um, again, this article mentioned how the great survey has been done. I mean, this kind of piece of crap is put together by his own opinion and the opinion of, as Richard pointed out earlier on, self-selected people, i.e. US-based people who go to Gaza because they have linked there. So how unbiased can they be? How objective can they be about the whole reporting? They go there because partly they want to do activism, partly probably because they get time off from their work, and partly because they want to be, on the uh, barricades with the Palestinians against Israel. So that they give their own time and expertise in order to give a fighting chance, literally a fighting chance, to the Palestinians. And again, the Palestinians are the people who've been hiding stash of weapons, missiles, and fighters and terrorists in schools, UNRWA-funded, UN-funded schools by you, me, and other taxpayers across the world. So we're not talking about people who particularly care about the welfare of children. Come on. And then suddenly we are supposed to believe that they are so concerned about the welfare of their own children, are we?
Yeah, just on that point about self-selecting. I mean, let's shine a spotlight on the reasons given within this essay. Familial, okay, you've got family members there. And why have you got family members there? Because you've got close links to the Gazans or the Palestinians. So the assumption that these are neutral people from abroad is already wrong. Religion is given as a reason. So you're based on the same ideology at root. The ideology of Islam, the ideology at some level of Islam being used to in a political sense as well as a religious sense. And then you've got this category that this particular author chooses to go for, which is a variety of reasons, of which he chooses to specify none. So I mean that's to quote Ayn Rand, a blank out, or to quote 1001 Memes, crickets. I mean, what are those variety of reasons? Because that is integral to understanding this article, your motivation for writing it, your motivation for how you see and have presented the information that we are being fed through this article, and therefore to determine, how to assess it. And whilst there's a raging question mark at the center of it that sits across every paragraph and every selection of testimony that is included or is excluded, of course, then how can you make an assessment that doesn't refer you back to things like, the religious motivation for a start, or whether it's, as Marco said there, wanting to do something for the, in inverted commas, Palestinian cause, i.e. anti-Israel, and this is your means of doing it with your pen, with your typewriter.
We have a super chat from Bulmos. Thank you so much. He's asking, is a country able to sue private entities for libel, considering how severely Israel is impacted by it legally, financially, and even for survival? I believe not, and also I'm not sure what court would you take them to unless we have some sort of like global court. Again, sort of libel is thing of basically some legal systems in some countries. Not every country sort of have this. So you're taking someone in front of that court. I wouldn't know how a country could take someone. Country can put sanctions on specific individuals or specific organization. I think that's as much, or sort of banning them from entry. I think that's as sort of as far as you can sort of get. Not to mention, I don't think maybe if there is some sort of international warrant for arrest, that country that the person is in could sort of what is it, extradite is the term for it. So maybe you could see something like that. But I think when it comes to this, not really. And again, it is not for the rest of the world to sort of cheer on Israel to sort of do the right thing. Israel should do the right thing, whatever the rest of the world does. So it's important to also, while we do criticize the rest of the world for not supporting Israel as it should be, Israel at the end of the day is the one sort of taking specific actions or not taking specific actions. So yeah, let's go to some of the testimonies. So first one is from Dr. Khawaja Ikram. He's an orthopedic surgeon, 53 years old, Dallas, Texas. He said, one day while in the ER, I saw a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, each with a single bullet hole to their head. When asked what happened, their father and brother said they had been told that Israel was backing out of Khan Yunis, so they returned to see if anything was left of their house. There was, they said, a sniper waiting who shot both children. Now, with this specific, I'm thinking why I picked this one. I mean, again, sort of the way it's sort of said, it sort of reminds me of the story we talked about, when BBC put out that story about, which was completely told by the Palestinian woman about IDF sort of killing her son. And the only story was of the woman. At the end of the set, at the end of it said they asked IDF to comment, and they either refused for now or they haven't yet. And that was it. The whole article was just what the woman said. And this is sort of similarly, some Palestinians said there was a IDF soldier who apparently killed children for fun, a 3 and a 5-year-old, and then was waiting there for some reason. I mean, again, what do you even make of it? I mean, you could even sort of try to find a story with why would he stay there? How did they even get those children out if he was still there? If he wanted to just kill Palestinians, wouldn't he kill anybody who approached? But yeah, just generally sort of, there are no evidences. It's just what people say. Anything you want to say on this, Marco?
Well, again, I mean, what random statement is that? I've seen you've seen two children with a bullet wound in the head. And so what? They were shot by somebody, yes, because they got a bullet wound in the head. Everything else is just Hamas telling us what the scenario was, what the circumstances were. But it doesn't really say anything objectively. All you have two children hit by bullets. Were the bullets from the IDF? Were the bullets from their own side? Blank.
I mean, maybe you can tell the distance at which, from a wound, the distance at which a gun was fired. I don't know enough to know whether that's the case or not. But even if you take the term sniper as being a true element of this story, which it could be, then what is a sniper? A sniper is somebody who fires at some distance from you whilst hidden, whose identity is probably remains unknown even after you've been hit. So how you can possibly therefore insinuate, and it is of course once again, as this article is based upon, insinuate that it's an Israeli sniper as opposed to a Hamas sniper who either makes a mistake or chooses to use, as Hamas does, the murder and injury of children to further their cause. And the more that occurs and is blamed on Israel, the better it is for the Hamas cause. Who can say? But all you've got is this testimony of this father and brother, which I, sort of mentioned earlier on. Who are they? Are they, whether they're paid up members of Hamas or ideologically supportive of Hamas? Either way, that's the testimony you're being given. That's the testimony you're repeating in the course of this article. So it's irrelevant.
Now, there is the next one from Dr. Nadel Farah. They say she or he, they say, I saw many children. In my experience, the gunshot wound was often to the head. Many had non-curable permanent brain damage. It was almost a daily occurrence to have children arrive at the hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. Now, again, here the sort of question is, even if that's true, if you think about it, this specific injury happening every few days, it's probably not just this hospital. It will probably, you would see it in many of the other hospitals, especially if these healthcare workers are from all over the place. They will mean like thousands of tens of thousands, not just children dying, but specifically children dying with one bullet to the head. That's sort of like execution style of like going through the land and pretty much just trying to cleanse people. Nothing else supports it. We have no other data sort of saying even something remotely similar. So yeah, again, what can you even make of this? I mean, what can you make of this? These are individual statements we've seen, but the goal is to present Israel as executing big, because this would be what it is, pretty much executing children for the fun of it. There is no strategic reasons offered. There is not like it would literally mean just for the heck of it, because again, the belief is that these are diabolical Jews who shoot children for fun. There is no other thing that you could even take away from it. Yeah, anything you want to say on this, Marco?
Oh, just that this kind of propaganda is as bad as it gets, really, because of course, as I mentioned earlier on, nobody cheers when a child is injured or dead. And this is the worst that could happen in our culture. Here in the West, something happened to a child is a terrible thing. No doubt about that. It's not non-negotiable. It's a bad thing, full stop. But in a war situation where Israel has been doing stupid things like dropping leaflets to tell the population we are about to bomb this area, and send texts on their mobile phones, making phone calls, which by the way Hamas is actively encourages the population to ignore. So they cheer on when the casualties in the population are high, because it puts Israel in a bad light. So Israel is doing everything it can stupidly, based on pure self flagellation and altruism that motivates this kind of actions, puts their own soldiers at risk by telling them we are about to hit this particular area. And then if they don't, if the Palestinians do not leave, choose to stay in order to sacrifice themselves for the cause, then it's Israel's fault. So whatever they do is going to be their fault anyway. But to provide this kind of notice to your enemy, to provide electricity and water and food supplies to your enemy, is as bad as it can get, really. Israel here is totally at fault for not fighting a war that it wants to win. Just, I don't know what they're doing. Just, sacrificing more and more Israelis for the sake of Palestinians' lives, civilians' life, and often terrorists anyway.
It's the nature of war that people are going to die and be injured by gunfire. Even if you don't even consider what's brought on the war, that it's a war of self-defense for Israel or any of that, in any war, people are going to die and be injured by gunfire, and that is often going to be to the head, because the aim is, within a war is to kill the enemy. And again, I'm stripping out the context here of which war we're talking about, but if we focus on this one, when somebody pops out above a building and is shot at, they're going to likely be hit in the head. If they're sent out of a building either as a decoy or fleeing, in the heat of the moment, they're likely to be shot. And that is the nature of war. That is why war is undesirable. And the way to stop war is not to start one. And that is exactly what the outcome is that we're talking here. And that's even when we focus on an instant or the instances that can occur where civilians are shot unintentionally in the course of a war, where the aim is to take out the Hamas fighters. But of course, the aim of the Hamas fighters is not to do the same to Israel. It's to take out any Israeli and to kidnap any Israeli of any age. And of course, when you're focused on what these kids do themselves and how they're brought up, we've seen all of the footage of kids holding Kalashnikovs at all of the Hamas events. You've seen kids at the release of hostages, at the lynching of witnessing and throwing rocks and taking part in lynchings as people are abducted on October the 7th, cheering for Hamas, cheering for the violence, which we are supposed to condemn as violence because it occurs to children, even though those are the children caught up in the ideology promoted by Hamas that has led to them being in this situation in the first place.
Now, we are running out of time, so let me just read two more testimonials specifically. Now, sort of moving on to malnutrition they've seen. So first, Dr. Nadel Farah, they've said, malnutrition was widespread. It was common to see patients reminiscent of the Nazi concentration camps with skeletal features. Now, I'll read the next one, then we can comment on both. Asma Taha, they've said the head of the NICU in particular was almost unrecognizable. He had lost nearly half of his body weight compared to his pre-war appearance. These changes were not just physical, they reflected the emotional and psychological toll the conflict had taken on those dedicated to caring for others, even as they struggled with their own personal losses and challenges. So now again, comparing this to Nazi concentration camps, comparing the other person sort of losing half of his body weight. If, like, again, this might happen to sort of individuals, but if this was truly sort of widespread, starvation is not something that happens to one person and everybody else is fine. Starvation is something that happens to everybody because there is a general lack of access of food, and we simply don't see that. We simply don't see anything close to that. Now, again, there might be cases on, I think, malnourishment, especially if specific kinds of foods or specific sort of vitamins when it comes to specific kind of foods are not available, and you could see sort of health consequences of those things. But this amount of sort of starvation, like losing half of your weight, we simply do not see. Like, this doesn't correspond with anything we've seen when it goes to Gaza. The fact is that Israel has been letting aid in. The fact is that when aid is not accessible, it is because of Hamas. And even then, generally, people do have still access to food. There is simply no starvation in Gaza. There have been reports about Gaza being on the brink of starvation for over a year, and still nothing is happening. So again, you might sort of point out like specific cases, but starvation again is not individual thing that happens when there is it's similar to when there is a sort of a disease sort of going around. It's not like one or two people got COVID in like whole town. No, once something comes in, it usually infects everyone. Now, obviously, starvation is different than its disease, but it's sort of when food isn't there, it's not like they just take it away from one guy and everybody else eats. No, nobody gets access. With that, Marco, any comments on this one or sort of general
Yeah,
living thoughts?
we've seen starvation in Gaza for the hostages. We've seen the pitiful scenes that the Palestinians put up every time they release a few hostages, and how the condition these hostages come out of from captivity from the Gazans. They are, malnourished, to be generous. They are often injured, and they're certainly traumatized and terrified. You can see how they move, and they're fearing for their life. And of course, we also see in the appalling scenes. Well, hopefully you haven't seen them because some of them are really terrible. But the scene that the Gazans themselves broadcasted on social media during the attack of October 7. So to me, a doctor based in the United States, let alone 60 odd doctors based in the United States, who are able to shut out, ignore the facts that occurred on October the 7th and choose to take the side of the Palestinians. Yes, fine, you're a doctor, you've got the Hippocratic oath, you don't know, do no harm, and you're treating a human, and you're able to not to see the person but just see the injured body, that's fine because that's part of the professional training. But to ignore the fact that these people injured are injured because of a specific reason, i.e., their government chose to go to war with Israel, is just blatantly evil. There's no excuse for somebody who's based in the West to ignore the fact of October 7th, to ignore why the Gazans are under the kosher now. It's of their own making, their choice. Again, they could surrender and everything would go away, more or less. And but they choose not to do it. We all seen how they treated the Bibas family. We've all seen, if you're really worried about children welfare, whatever they've done, they killed the kids. They killed kids during October 7th. Nobody seemed to be particularly bothered about that for some reason. I wonder why.
I think, I mean, it's hideous, isn't it? It's hideous to transpose what's been the case for the hostages in Israel to the Palestinians in the way that it's done here, particularly with the skeletal features, because it's those hostages that have skeletal features, and those are the images which are hard to shake. And I've seen nothing remotely comparable anywhere else in anything else we've seen. But we are told within the course of this article that lots of the families, in fact, I think it said all of the families, showed pictures of what they looked like beforehand. So it's obviously they've been trained to show pictures of what they look like when they were a little bit heavier, as a tool of propaganda, once again, as an instruction from Hamas and as a part of the Palestinian approach to using absolutely everything you can as evidence of suffering and blaming it on Israel. And I think the guy who's quoted in the Times of Israel article repeatedly, John Spencer, a leading international expert in urban warfare. I think there was a couple of comments I wanted to pull out from him, which he said there's little in this, little evidence beyond the reality of fighting, which is our point that this is war. And all you're saying that war is bad. Well, yeah, we know that. And he also says Hamas wants every and anybody who died to be counted as Israel's fault, including the killing of people themselves. And that refers both to those with gunshot wounds that ended up dying from it and any that did die of starvation, because the aid is going in, it's stolen by Hamas, it's retained by Hamas, it's sometimes sold back to the Palestinians by Hamas in order to fund the activities of Hamas. Or it's used to make sure their own population suffer from a lack of food that they could have were it not for Hamas. All of these lines lead back to Hamas, the ideology that underpins what they're trying to do and have been trying to do ever since October the 7th and before. So, I mean, yeah, the article could be debunked on first reading, back when it first came out. But I think the Times of Israel has done a good job here, and it's worth reading that article as well, and seeing the two of them side by side, and seeing the context of how Times of Israel tackles this particular instance of promoting Palestinian propaganda.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to go through the Times of Israel article. I'll put both of the articles in the description, as well as John Spencer, the expert on urban warfare that was quoted in the article. He has also a bunch of podcasts. He has one with Sam Harris, which I listened to a little bit, and it sounded really good. So I recommend checking that one out. With that, we have a super chat from Bull Moose. Thank you so much. He says, "I met Yarden Bibas. The description, I keep thinking of the term living ghost after that." Yeah, I mean, yeah, what can you even say to that? But with that, thank you everybody for watching today. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show. Until then, thank you again, and bye-bye.
Bye.